Well, welcome everyone to our event, Schooled Live, Education Lost and Found in the COVID Era. Without doubt, this past school year has been unlike any other in education. The technology that made widespread remote learning possible just didn't exist only a few years ago. And the idea that all students would have take-home laptops, it was seemingly far-fetched before, and it's now become commonplace. Students and educators had huge obstacles to overcome to keep on track, and some say the resilience and perseverance that was shown may be the most positive legacy of this moment. But of course, there have been plenty of drawbacks. There are big questions about learning loss, attendance and failure rates in many schools are down. Many students missed out on a year of normal school development. I'm sorry. Oh, and the isolation of the pandemic made all of this more difficult, especially with the backdrop of family members getting sick, dying, or losing jobs due to COVID. And in many Philadelphia neighborhoods, of course, there's been a spike in deadly gun violence. To help us unpack how all of this affects schools and students, we have a robust panel made up of the people who can speak to these issues most intimately. Charity Robbins is a rising junior at Carver High School of Engineering and Science in North Philadelphia. Welcome, Charity. Keziah Ridgway is a history teacher at Northeast High School in Northeast Philadelphia. Great to have you here with us, Mrs. Ridgway. And Maritza Gurity is a Philadelphia parent of 4 public school students, 3 elementary schoolers and 1 high schooler. She's also the Pennsylvania delegate for the National Parents Union, and she's an elementary school secretary here at Bethune Elementary in Philadelphia. And we also have Matthew Fisher, who's the principal of Comwell Egan Catholic High School in Bucks County, which is part of the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. And of course, we have WHYY education reporter Avi Wolfman-Arendt here with me in studio. Well, Maritza, I want to start with you from a parent point of view. Can you give us an insight into how the past 15 months looked? What was it like for your family as you navigated remote school and the challenges of the pandemic?
Well, first, thank you very much for having me. I can say honestly that I consider myself one of the fortunate ones because I am not alone in my household. You know, my husband, he and I worked in conjunction. While I worked in the school, he took some time off from his job of many years to be able to stay home with our little ones and assist them with navigating the Chromebooks. So, and I know that for many families, especially in certain parts of Philadelphia, that was not an option. There were many single parents or single guardian households that had to make a choice of either working to maintain the roofs over their heads or staying home to help their little ones. Or if there was multi siblings in the home, many siblings had to now become caretakers for their younger siblings to help them log on every day so that their guardian or parent could then go to work.
But just what was it like trying to get, 4 kids to learn on laptops in your house all at the same time?
Well, my teenager, she didn't have any issues. My rising second grader, it was a little bit of a learning curve. And surprisingly, the 2 little ones, you'd be surprised at how quickly 3 and 4 year old children learned how to navigate Google Classroom. So
Yeah.
the most we had to do was just set it up and leave it on. But they very quickly learned how to click on that little phone button, click on that camera button, and hang up whenever they were bored because they did that a lot too. They would just hang up. And then and the one thing they kept on forgetting is that mommy works at the school, so mommy can reach the teachers and the teachers can reach mommy to let her know, hey, for some reason your children aren't logged on. So it was interesting to say the
Ex-
least.
Extra layer of accountability in your house for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Charity, speak to us a little bit about what it was like as a student. You went remote last March and you never had a single class this year as a high school student in person. What was that like?
I mean, it was very like I felt like I was missing out on a lot, and it was very like just sad at first. I'm like, oh man, I'm missing my sophomore year, but I understand why, and it's like something that I feel like has a lot of pros and cons. Like while I wasn't able to like go to any classes, in person, I felt that because of that, I was able to build more intimate relationships with my like teachers because everyone's like navigating this together. So I feel like it helped me like build stronger bonds with my teachers as well as like my classmates as well, because I mean, like everyone is bored at home. And I feel like that's something, it's like a common factor that we all share as a school community. So I feel like while it's like something I'm bummed over that like I didn't get to attend any classes this year, it also has like its pros. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you talked about just you transferred to a new school this year and you weren't really able to meet your classmates in person. There's a real social kind of toll on what we all went through this year, or a lot of students especially went through this year. I guess speak to that more.
Oh yeah, definitely. So I do not know many people from my graduating class. I'm very lucky that my best friend, she attends this school, and I've been able to like meet people through her as well as like through programs that I'm a part of, like chess and like robotics. And I'm also a part of this program that's teaching us to build nanosatellites. So I've been able to like establish good relationships, but now I'm like curious about what it's gonna be like when it's not like through texting and like I'm really there talking to that person, you know? So it's like, it's a little like disheartening that there's so many people that I've yet to meet because I've been at home. But at the same time, I feel like the people that I did meet this year, I like established really close relationships with them.
Yeah, yeah. And Keziah Ridgway, you're a teacher at Northeast High. So for you too, you had this whole year of students that you never got to interact with in person. What was that
Yeah.
like?
Well, it was hard at first, but I think I had a bit of an easier time compared to my other colleagues because I had students that had such big personalities that they were able to bring that into the Zoom session. So, the first few days are always a little weird. So what I tried to do to make kids feel comfortable was play music. So like I created a playlist in the beginning of the year, and um, I tried to put in some popular songs that the kids would know, so they would be jamming when they came in. And we did some deep breathing, and I just introduced the kids to who I was, what we were going to learn, why the class was important. I teach African American history, and so that's a really important class. I also teach IB social and cultural anthropology. So at first it was a little awkward. We're all getting to learn each other, you know, should I comment in the chat? Should I not? I think that's what a lot of students were up against. Some put their cameras on, some didn't, but I just wanted to set the tone. So I told them, look, I know that some of you, you're very shy, you're very uncomfortable. It's a lot to sit in front of a screen every day. So if it makes you feel comfortable to turn your camera off, then do that, but you still have to participate. So either you're going to unmute or we're going to have a party in the chat. And so we eventually got there. And I have to say, like every single class, there was never a class period where I did not have some sort of interaction in the chat. There was never a class period where I didn't have students who were able to unmute and share. Now I know that for some of my other colleagues, it was not that simple. It wasn't that easy, but I really feel like what made the biggest difference for me was making them feel comfortable and playing music and taking that time to deep breathe and center ourselves before we jumped into the lesson. And I tried to make it fun for them. So I'm gonna crack jokes. If I have to stand up and dance and like make a fool of myself, then I'm willing to do that. But I think for a lot of students, they enjoyed that because they understood that they had a teacher who understood what they were going through, and that is what made them show up every single day.
And you had to like relearn what it meant to be a teacher in a different context, right? Like that was a big
Yeah.
learning curve for you to be a
Yes.
virtual teacher. What was that like?
Well, I'm a mom of four. So all of my kids were home with me. So not only am I learning how to be a virtual teacher, I'm also navigating life as a mom of a teenager in high school, one in middle school and two in elementary school. So outside of the having to mute myself to tell my kids stop making noise or you can't get lunch, but really trying to figure out a way to make learning fun, to make them interested in what we're learning. So we did a lot of work with primary sources. We also did a lot of work with projects. So one of the projects that I'm really excited about, which I know some teachers were not able to have much success with online projects, but we did something called the PFAS project, which was about the Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society. And basically what that is a society that was created by women, and it was a multicultural organization. And there's a sign that celebrates PFAS down on 6th and Arch, but there's only one woman's name on it, and that's Lucretia Mott. So looking at that sign, you wouldn't know that it was a multicultural group of women who created it. So what we did was we broke the kids up into groups. They had to write a letter, a social media campaign, a video campaign, a letter to the mayor, and a letter to the governor. And each group was responsible for educating people about what PFAS was and why it was important that they add a Black woman's name to the plaque as well, so that they understand that it's a multicultural group of women that founded it. And it went extremely well. We have over 100 signatures on the petition. And I think it was projects like that which helped me get my groove. I realized that kids they want to be here and they want to learn. They just don't want to have a teacher lecturing them every single day. So you can't do that. You're not in the classroom anymore. You can't write notes on the board and expect kids to take notes. So yeah, we took notes some days, but I tried to think of ways like, are we going to use Padlet today, right? So Padlet is a great platform that I used during the pandemic. Are we going to use Google Docs and have everybody write on it? I figured out a way for them to do a gallery walk virtually by switching them around in breakout rooms. So doing things like that, I feel like really helped me. And the kids would say what they liked too. So I listened to them and they would say, Miss Ridgway, we don't want to do Cornell notes this week. Can we do this? And can we do this? Yes, you can. So I think that's really important also to allow them to have a bit of agency.
Okay. Matthew Fisher, you're the principal of Conwell Egan, like we said, Catholic school in the Archdiocese in Bucks County. And you and your staff and your students have been basically doing hybrid learning since September of 2020. So very different experience from what we've been hearing from the Philadelphia perspective, the Philadelphia public school perspective. What was that like to figure out how to basically you were virtual a few days a week and you were in person a few days a week?
Yes. Thanks again for having me, Kevin. And thank you for everyone who's joining us out there. The schedules that our students followed, they would be in school Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, and they would alternate Friday with the other group of students. That allowed us to get every student into the building at least a few days a week. Class sizes were cut in half in person. So for example, if you had an Algebra 1 class of 30 students, 15 of them would be in front of you in class, and the other 15 would actually be learning through Zoom, through a camera that was, cameras were installed in all of our classrooms to enable us to do that. So yes, it took a lot of adapting for our teachers, for our students, for our parents at home. I would say it took, 9 months of adapting, right? So I don't know if we ever fully got there, but our students were appreciative for their days that they were able to be in person. The feedback that we gathered from them throughout the school year was that they much rather be in person than at home during their virtual days. We did have some families and students who opted to be fully virtual. So they were able to attend their classes through Zoom every single day. Their camera, their Zoom put them right into the classroom with the rest of the students and their teacher. So families did have that option if they didn't feel safe sending their kids back to school. But, I think in the end, it was the right decision to come back to school in September. We were fortunate to have the resources to make our building safe, to make the learning environment safe. I think we had a learning plan in place that allowed our students to continue to learn. I commend everyone else who's on this panel because just a few months that we ended the end of last school year, we were fully virtual. And after those 3 months, I guess, I think everyone was ready to get back to school. So for them to be able to get through an entire school year in that same situation, hats off to them.
Yeah. And we talked a little bit before. I would have expected maybe more pushback from faculty on going back into the classroom, but you say that really wasn't the case there.
No, I mean, I think it was when the decision was first made, I think that people probably had mixed emotions because it was so unknown to everyone. There's the element of safety, right, with the pandemic. There's the uncertainty of what teaching in that environment would look like. Nobody had ever taught in a hybrid type of environment with, trying to get a class started with students in front of you while trying to let students in on a Zoom, and then also trying to get class started, and then also trying to monitor learning. So there was a lot, but we were fortunate. Every single one of our teachers showed up just about every single day. We didn't have any teachers who went out on leave. Some of them were a little more hesitant than others to come back, but they all came back, and some of them were excited and wanted the students in school every day. So I think the feelings about returning to in-person instruction were mixed, but they showed up every day. And when we came back in September, they hit the ground running and adapted to it, I think, quicker than we had, expected them to.
And I'm sure the question on a lot of people's minds is, okay, so were there a lot of COVID cases?
So we went through, I would say, the first 2 months of the school year with, I think, 2. And then right before Thanksgiving, about a week before Thanksgiving, I think, when the entire state and country and maybe the world kind of erupted with COVID cases, so did our school. We never got to a point where we hit a percentage of our population where we needed to shut down. But if we had 2 through the first 2 months, in the 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, we may have had 12. So, it increased. And that was pretty steady through, Christmas break. And then, through contact tracing and working with the Bucks County Health Department, there wasn't a single case that we had throughout that time that we believed or the county believed was either transmitted or spread through the students being in school. And I think a lot of studies out there indicated that schools were ultimately safe places and were not spreading the virus. So, we had a few more throughout the school year. I mean, it never really stopped up until a couple of weeks ago. We still had 2 more, but it never got to the point where we considered going fully virtual for an extended period of time or anything like that.
Yeah, that's, remarkable. Like you said, to go through November, December of 2020, when the cases were exploding and it seemed like everything was shutting down. You guys were there in person through all of that. That is pretty remarkable. Yeah. I'm curious, Maritza, like from your point of view as both a parent and a school employee, do you look back on this year and think, I wish the district did something different? I wish Philadelphia did something different.
I wish the district did many things different. I wish the district, first, I want to commend all of the administrators and educators for doing a tremendous job and doing the best that they could with what they were afforded. I wish the district would have had some more parent input. I wish they would have had meetings earlier on than now. We're seeing all these surveys being hit through our text messages, our emails, our voicemail blasts. I wish there would have been conversations had with families to ask them, what can we do to make things better? What do you need? I can say that at Bethune, our school leader is amazing. She did her best to have town halls, virtual town halls, but that wasn't the case across the district. Decisions were being made without any parent input. And being a delegate from the National Parents Union, that really bothered me. There were some questions. I mean, I have percentages based on surveys that we did. And 59% of parents said that they felt more stressed during the pandemic. 25% had experienced conflicts between working and providing childcare. This bell schedule situation that happened 2 weeks ago, absolutely no parent input. but decisions were being made about either starting the school day earlier, starting the school day later, or keeping it the same. So my question always was, were parents involved across the district, and how would this affect them, especially the working families? So a lot of things happen where honestly, things are being done too late. And hopefully they will learn from this experience and ensure that there is more parent input going forward.
Yeah. I mean, I guess trying to think back to last summer and what the district was doing, what the school board was doing, Superintendent Height seemed to express the entire time he wanted kids to be in the building if they could. And in those early months of the pandemic, the pushback from at least the people who showed up to the school board meetings was pretty strong in saying we do not want people in the building. And then there was a survey that was done in, I'm going to say late October, early November, where they tried to collect some input, and then the cases spiked.
Yes.
But I guess just outside of just the idea of you would want them to have more input from parents to make decisions, did you personally wish something was different? Did you wish there was in-person option? Did you wish something fundamentally was different?
I wish, my thought, like every single time there was an issue going on with the constant pushback, the 3-time pushback of the date of when hybrid would start, I got the phone calls at my school. So I was the first person the parent would speak to express their concern, their frustration, their anger, their agreement or disagreement. So I felt I was in Switzerland because I was a parent. I felt the same way about certain things. Then I also had to think about it from the district perspective as an employee of the district and say, okay, well, we want to keep everyone safe. We want to make sure that everyone is safe. We tried our best to communicate to all the families, and I'm quite sure all the other district schools did, in letting families know what safety measures were being afforded at each particular school. There were some schools that had outbreaks they couldn't open. There were some schools that had outbreaks due to staff having outbreaks, so they didn't want the children to come in. I don't know if every school across the district had the availability of having all the adults in the building tested every single week, which is something that my school afforded. So it was what I felt safer being in my school environment because I knew all the adults were tested. And then now with, children 12 years old and above, having that ability, if the parents chose to have their children vaccinated, it's going to provide another layer of safety. But early on, I mean, as far as the corona concerns, 65% of families wanted to make sure the children were on track. 62, missing social interactions, as was already discussed. Parents worried about children's social emotional well-being. I mean, so many children were in a state of depression for many, many months. And that, of course, affected their grades, affected their studying. And it was just a lot of things that families' input is required. And then there's that big piece. And out of all these surveys, these polls that were done by the National Parents Union across the country, 82% of parents said that providing quality technology was a big pressure cooker in their household. Not every family could afford to pay a high cable internet bill. So we have cases of children that did not attend at all this entire school year as a result of not having access to internet. Even if they were given a hotspot, they couldn't get to where the hotspots were being given out, or they were told you were not eligible to get, Comcast Essentials, which that service was very sparse. And I'm going to keep my language, G-rated, but it was terrible coverage, terrible access. One hotspot per household is not going to cover a multi-children household. So there were a lot of things that were happening that hopefully with all this money coming in from the federal government, the district is going to be receiving millions. Do the right thing, get the right resources and information, but make sure that parent voice is heard and involved in that conversation.
Yeah. Charity, we're talking about parent voice. I'm wondering what you think about student voice, and if that was something that should have also been more considered, and how that could have been better integrated into the district's plans or the general plans in this region for school reopening.
Yeah, I also agree that there should have been more voices from the people who are like directly affected by the changes that's made like from above. Like, I can't tell you how many times my schedule changed this year, And it's just all so confusing, you know, like in the beginning, I think I was getting out of school at like 2:40, and then I started getting out at 1, and then all of a sudden started getting out at 2. And it's just really hard to manage, especially when you're so used to a schedule. So some of the stuff that you commit to, it like goes with that schedule. Like, okay, well, I do robotics at this time because around this time is when I'm doing homework. You have to like schedule time for homework and everything. And that like, there were so many times where that like I had to just change everything just out of nowhere because of like some of the changes that were made. Also, I feel like I just wish there was more like we could have done, like our voices were heard like as students, because it feels like we were just going along with what was happening. And it got to the point where even like I would talk to my teachers like, oh my goodness, why is this happening? And they had no idea. And like it was just really weird overall, because it felt like you would think that since everyone is going through this problem and since students are directly affected because our education is in jeopardy by all of these changes, that we would like our voices would be heard, but it wasn't. So I am hoping that next year when hopefully we are in person, that we do have more input on the things that are decided that concern our futures, you know?
Charity, I'm curious. Okay, so say if Dr. Hike came to you in October and said, should we have in-person school for high school kids at least a couple days a week? And whatever you tell me, that's what we're going to do. And how would you balance your desire to be around your classmates and kind of have that typical high school experience with the COVID concerns and the health concerns that, of course, were real and were in people's minds? What would you have said?
Well, firstly, I would be very intimidated because I think it's so important when you make a big decision to have input from other people, because you only see life through your lens. And I know that like for a lot of my friends, like they suffer from like autoimmune deficiency, not autoimmune deficiency, but like autoimmune diseases. So they physically cannot go back. So if I were to say, oh yeah, I want to go back just from my own personal desires, that wouldn't have been fair to anyone else. So if I was like tasked with deciding our fate, I would want input. Like that would be like my main thing, but not just from like the people at my school, but like around the district, because I mean, it's so important. But I think in October, I would have said no, just because the COVID concerns. But if we were asked like around, let's say like a lot of my friends saying, oh, I wish we could have went back like after spring break, like also wish that was an option. Like if it was later, I would have said, yeah, definitely. Because like we have access to vaccinations. We like know more about how to keep this like controlled, and we know how to keep ourselves safe. In October, I would have said no, honestly. But if I was asked later, I would have liked the option to be in person, at least for a little bit, before like the year ended.
Keziah, your thoughts on that? Did you have an advocacy point of view through the year on should we be back or not?
So I was one of the teachers leading the charge to not go back. And the reason why I didn't feel like it was a good idea to go back is because I am from Philadelphia, born and raised on the playground as well. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm from Philadelphia, and I teach at the largest high school in Philadelphia. Honestly, Northeast High is larger than some towns in America. We have about 3,500 students and over 200 staff members and teachers. And we are in a building where we thankfully were chosen to have heat, but we don't have air conditioning. And there are a lot of other buildings that don't have heat or air conditioning, and depending on the classroom. And so the district solution, which we all saw once we did decide to reopen, was to use fans while it was still cold for ventilation. You asked Maritza a question about, what does she wish the district had done different? What does she wish the district did different? And I'm going to answer that by saying I wish that the district had actually started to really care about building conditions and buildings 20 years ago. I would have asked that the district started removing asbestos and lead and all the other health hazards that we have within our building 20, 25, 30 years ago. Honestly, this has been a problem since the 1970s, 1980s about having asbestos in buildings. So not only were we involved in a health pandemic, but we were also involved in a education system which has forgotten our children. They just forgot them. And I think it's very interesting how certain parents now are concerned with learning loss. Where were you 10 years ago? Where were you 5 years ago? Where were you when I graduated in 2003, where 3 years before I graduated, the state took over and there was no change? You know, I think that teachers did the best that they could, and students did the best that they could, and administrators did the best that they could. But honestly, society did not do the best that it could for our kids. And they haven't done that for years. We don't want to pay taxes to make sure that our kids have the best. We don't want to advocate to make sure that our kids have the best. And I say this as a former student of Philadelphia and a parent. I have a kid that's in public school right now. My other three are in charter school. And I just think that the things that could have been done in order to ensure we were able to get back earlier were things that needed to be done 20 years before, right? Like making sure our ventilation was up to date. You know what I'm saying? Making sure that there's air conditioning and heating in our rooms. And so I think that was the difference. That's the difference of, you know, with all these comprehensive schools being closed down 10 years ago, now you have many more students in some of our biggest schools now, right? So what you're talking about is a petri dish, you know, of COVID, but other health issues. Asthma is a huge issue in our schools because of the ventilation issue and the mold and the dust, right? And so we know that asthma is one of those things that could really make you have a hard time dealing with COVID. So I advocated that schools remain closed, and I did not send my son back to high school when our school reopened, even though I must say that Northeast was in a much better position than most schools. But I asked him and he said he did not want to go. He would rather wait until the fall. And so I acquiesced to what he wanted.
Okay. Principal Fisher, I'm curious if you could speak a little bit to just like the different viewpoints that you heard from parents in your context. I'm sure you had some parents, like you said, who were more cautious and some who were more ready.
Sure. I think in the beginning, when we announced that we would be coming back under the hybrid schedule, most parents were happy because the students were getting back into the buildings. The fact that we did have the fully virtual option available for them allowed those families who did not feel comfortable sending their kids back just yet an option to keep them home virtually. They weren't locked into that option for a quarter or a semester or the whole year. We were flexible with the parents. We didn't have students who were coming back and forth constantly or anything like that, but they had the option of being fully virtual. As the school year went on, I think we had a very, very tiny percentage of parents who wanted our students back full time. Once we got into the second semester, once the vaccine started getting out, towards the end of the school year. But it was a very small percentage. I think for the most part, most of our families were happy with the hybrid schedule. I think that they wanted to hear that we'll be returning to, 5 days of in-person instruction in September, which is the plan of Conway-Legan and the Archdiocese, which is great news. But they were pretty supportive throughout the whole process for the most part. There's always a couple outliers, but, I'd say 98% were very happy with the system and the product that we had in place for this school year.
And I guess just based on what we've been hearing from some of our other panelists, you were in a different situation. It seemed like you had, like you mentioned earlier, you had some resources, your building felt safe. Could you speak about, I guess, how you were perceiving how these decisions were playing out elsewhere in the region versus what you guys were doing?
Sure. I mean, the Archdiocese did a great job in the summer once, it was determined that we would be coming back on their hybrid schedule to get our ventilation system checked and upgraded so that it was, ready to go come September. We added air conditioning into all of our classrooms, which helped increase ventilation, hopefully to make things a little bit safer. And we had a health and safety reopening plan that we felt and the Archdiocese felt would keep our students safe while they were in our building. Before I came back to Comaligan in 2016, I spent 8 years in the school district of Philadelphia. I was at Edison High School, which, I had a great experience for 8 years. But, hearing what everyone else on the panel is saying, I understand. I'll leave it at that. So, I understand the situation that they were in. I understand the struggle they went through throughout the school year on, when are they going to come back to school? The teachers thinking it's not safe to come back. I totally get it. I lived it for 8 years. And yeah, I think that at our school, at least at Comaligan, we were probably in a better spot to open our school safely in September. We felt comfortable bringing our faculty and staff back. We felt comfortable bringing our students back. I think the fact that we were able to have, half of the students in the classes. So instead of having 30 students in a class, you have 15 students and they can socially distance, and they were required to wear masks throughout the school year, even through today. Once the guidelines started to change, in May, the Archdiocese and Comaligan, we decided that our reopening plan from September, which had all of our health and safety guidelines, would stay in place until the end of the school year. So there was some consideration in returning all the students to 5 days for a short period of time. But ultimately, the health and safety guidelines that kept us safe for the first 8 months of the school year stayed in place, even as society has started to change.
Yeah. Avi Wolfman-Aaron, I want to bring you into the conversation. I mean, you were following all this stuff pretty closely throughout the year, both from the public school side and the private school side. When you think back on this year, what will you remember most about how things unfolded?
Gosh, what will I remember most? I mean, it's hard to pick just one thing. I mean, I'll probably most remember conversations with teachers, parents, and students about what they were going through, just the types of conversations we're having now. There was just so many remarkable stories and so many lives that had been upturned. I mean, and not always in negative ways, but, people, the adaptability of people is really, really remarkable. I did a story with a elementary school teacher, middle school teacher, was an elementary/middle school, doing her first week of online learning. This was back in April, and just going through that experience with her. We talked every day, and the ups and downs of that. I'll remember probably stuff like that more than anything else, and more than the sort of larger macro disagreements and fights. But I think if I were to the one thing I might take away from some sort of a larger level from this year is that there's lots of advantages to being big and having scale, but in a time like this, it did feel often like the larger entities, whether they were districts or not, it was just harder for them to move and adapt as the knowledge of the disease and the way that it interacted with schools was constantly changing. And it just felt like whether it was a parochial school or a charter school, it was easier to build consensus in these smaller groups of people than it was in larger districts. And I don't know if that's really anybody's fault. It's just, I think it's just sort of the way of the world. When you have a smaller group of people, I just feel like it's easier to reassure people and get people's buy-in and build trust. And that's not to exonerate the school district of Philadelphia or some other large districts, because they did plenty of things to erode trust over many, many years. And Keziah Ridgway spoke to that. But, there were I kind of saw it play out in smaller communities, smaller school districts in just a different way. And I do think that's something that I'll probably think about moving forward.
Yeah, the other thing we haven't really gotten into yet too much is just how much the underlying backdrop of the economic ramifications of the pandemic were behind so many of these that were happening at the same time. Really got something in my throat today. I'm sorry. But I think back to a story that you did, Avi, about a mom in Chester County who was essentially homeless through much of the pandemic
Yeah.
and was still trying to navigate school for her children. And like that just was happening all across our region. In many times it was invisible to folks who weren't intimately involved in it. And that story you did, I guess, spotlighted that. Anything you want to add about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we'll be sifting through the ramifications of this last year and a half for the next 20 years. I mean, there's a lot of students. One of the difficult things, right, is when you're in person, that there are certain things you can pick up on that are very difficult to pick up on. I imagine, or I've been told, in the virtual environment. And there are a lot of students that I think we could safely say have sort of just been on the periphery, on the fringe for a year and a half now, and have been hard to reach, whether it's because of technological problems, whether it's because of sort of lives that have been uprooted in some way. And yeah, the when students return to something more approximating normal, there will be a lot of bridge building to be done between schools and students and parents. And it's going to be a massive project, unlike anything that I imagine any of us have ever seen.
Yeah, Maritza, I'm wondering if you can speak to the stuff that we're talking about now, and now kind of thinking forward, where people are going to be coming back in the fall. There are these federal stimulus dollars to try to help in many different ways. What do you think that the district or individual schools need to do to kind of reconnect with some of those people that Avi is mentioning, that like maybe were on the periphery, or they just stopped attending school, or they were just, we kind of, they're a big question mark at this point. How should we be re-engaging them? What needs to happen?
The schools need to be the community hubs again. They need to be the place where a family can go, or they can call and speak to the school leader or the teacher and say, I'm finally able to get back. We've been having issues. I mean, we had so many instances of families calling in throughout the school year with very different reasons. A family becoming homeless, a family having to leave their home due to a domestic violence situation, a family being the victim of a fire, a family being the victim of multi people in the home, unfortunately dying due to cases of COVID, a family losing family members, a mother, grandmother, father, due to the gun violence in the city. I mean, it was a myriad of things all throughout this school year that I saw, that we got the first call. The school family immediately went into action and provided whatever they could for the families that were in need, whether it was, material things, money being collected. But all these reasons, when families come back in September, there's still going to be the issues of families that having difficulties because of what happened this year in finding before and after care, affordable before and after care. So if all this money that's coming in to the school districts, if monies are allotted to those schools in those areas, in those catchment areas, in those zip codes that the school leaders know their school population's needs, and they say, let's connect with this program outside of the school that will provide before and after care. Or better yet, why don't we offer more money to our existing employees in the schools to see if they could come in earlier and help watch these children at 7:30 in the morning until the school day starts, or pay them so they can stay until 5 or 5:30 to help with those working families. I mean, the thing is, if we want to be able to keep our children in the school, be of as much support as possible to the families that are in need, provide those programs. I mean, there are a lot of what I don't want to see is wasteful spending.
Yeah.
As a parent, I don't want to see the money coming down the pike for nonsensical things. Make sure the children have reliable internet access. The Chromebooks, I'm sorry. They were garbage. They were. And consistently having to replace them, repair them. Unfortunately, not every family was able to monitor the usage of these Chromebooks. They've come back cracked, shattered, come in two pieces, and I understand. And I can't blame every parent because we don't know every parent's situation. Not every parent was able to say, okay, honey, put your Chromebook away until tomorrow. No, they used it for everything. They ate in front of it, spilled juice, spilled soda, water, food, everything that can happen happened, and they had to constantly be replaced. When we come back in September, what if there's a resurgence of COVID? What if there's an outbreak? Are we going to make sure that those children have access to be able to still continue with their same teacher? So just do not wastefully spend the money. And once again, I'm going to keep on hammering this. Get the input of the parents as well as the teachers. Teachers know their children. Teachers know their students. They understand them. They know when they're not having a good day. They do that. Respect the voice of the educators and the parents and guardians. Don't leave it just up to admin or the people at 440. And I'm saying this as an employee. Don't just leave it up to the people that are making six-figure salaries. Talk to us. And speaking about salaries, raise employee salaries. Raise it.
Yeah.
You don't know how many teachers are not coming back because it was too much of a stress and the pay was not worth it. There should be not one teacher across the country that has to work a side hustle, a side job to make ends meet. A secretary won poverty wages. You got to do better. You're going to get all this money. Pay people what they're worth. I'm sorry.
No, I liked it.
Charity, I just wanted, if you could reflect on, from what you've seen of your peers, your friends, as far as mental health issues and how this year of isolation has affected that.
Yeah, so it's been really hard being virtual, and I've seen that in a lot of my friends. And my school actually suffered a loss due to that. So it's just been like really hard with everything being virtual and just changing, because at first, like, you're like, oh wow, we're gonna be away from school, like this sounds amazing. But it gets to the point where it's like you're home 24/7. You feel like you're locked like in a cage almost. This used to be the place that you like love. You love coming home at the end of the day and just like winding down, and knowing you're here 24/7 and you want to get out. It's been mental health I've seen among my peers. It's been like a real struggle, even with myself. I find that just like the certain characteristics that I had in my freshman year when I was in person, I just don't have anymore. Like, I used to be really social. It was just very easy to like be in a crowd, and now I find myself like feeling like I want to be alone, and I know that's not really who I am, because that's not who I was like a year ago. I can't even recognize myself now. It's like when I'm in a group of people, I feel like, oh man, maybe this would be easier if I was isolated, because I wouldn't have to talk to anyone. I wouldn't have to like face my anxiety. And like a lot of my friends, they've like just struggled with mental health. And the only good thing that I can say is that I know like now, if I need to ever reach out to a teacher, they're going to be there for me. And even like my counselors at school, like they are really there for you. And that's something that it took going through this to really truly appreciate, because there have been so many times like things just weren't okay at home, and like I would reach out to like a teacher or even like a counselor, and they would be like, okay, you want to talk? And it's something I really appreciate. And so I think it's sad that we had to go through this for a lot of stuff to come to light, like to feel like, oh my goodness, this is not what I want. Like, I don't want to be isolated, because you like being away from school, and now like I can't wait to get back in the building. So I think that also mental health, the topic of it, is something that needs to be talked about more in schools. Like, I've been trying to work with my teacher to see if we can do something where like it's implemented throughout the day, where there are like places we can go like in the middle of class if this is just like not our day, because you have off days where it's just like nothing is working and you need that time to speak to someone. So I really hope like this topic of mental health is something that's no longer like taboo to people, and it's just we can raise more awareness about it.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being so honest and open, Charity. Really incredible, and we appreciate your perspective a lot. And clearly, you're an incredible student. You have a periodic table and a solar system behind you. And so just on that point, though, like, okay, we're talking about these federal funds coming in. What do you think is like the number one priority for spending that money? To speaking to the point that you're just speaking to, like people are going to be back in September. Where's the need? Where do we put our energy and our money?
Honestly, the classrooms, we need more resources. Like there isn't enough. At my last school, I didn't have access to like anything. We didn't have good internet in the building. The Chromebooks were so bad. Like we had assigned Chromebooks and like they just didn't work. It was really like weird. It's something that needs to be fixed, because a lot of the stuff, while we do stuff on paper while we're in person, there's sometimes when we need the internet to like do research. And the fact that we're in school and we don't have access to this stuff because like there isn't enough money being poured into the schools for the stuff we actually need. We need new textbooks. The textbooks are like, they aren't in good condition because they've been used for so many years, and you would just think to replace them, but that hasn't happened. I think that's some of the stuff we really need. So like internet, we need textbooks. And even I think this is something so important that schools should offer like more pencils and like notebooks for students that can't, like they don't have the means to get the stuff for themselves. Like, for example, there are some schools that you need to like get your own calculator, but you need like the good calculator, like the one that's like $150. Mm-hmm. And some parents, they just do not have the money and the resources to do that. And as a result of that, like students struggle. So I think the district just needs to really pay more attention to the students, and give them more resources.
Yeah. Keziah Ridgway, just bring you into the conversation on this point of federal stimulus funding. There's a lot of it out there, and the district has some decisions to make. Like, how do we spend this in the most optimal way? What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I think before COVID happened, it was estimated that we would need about $1 to $2 billion to get every single school up to par. And that's whether we need to like tear down a school to rebuild it or redo it. There are some schools that you can't even put updated air conditioning in because the electrical is so bad. So it would just probably short and go away, and go out. And so in terms of what we should do with the money, I think we should spend the money on updating buildings, mental health, because yes, it's a real issue. And I think suicide completion has risen about 60% over the last 10 years among children ages 10 up to young adults ages 24. So 10 to 24. And so we need more counselors in our schools. Sometimes there's like 500 students for one counselor. That's unacceptable. The number by pediatricians, American Society of Pediatricians, I believe, says 250 per counselor, right? And so we need mental health crisis centers in our schools. I do think that we have 33 kids in class right now. I don't know who decided that that's the best way to educate children, but I am so sorry to inform them that it is not the best way to educate children. There should be no more than 20, and I really think 15, but no more than 20 children in every single classroom. And guess what? There needs to be a co-teacher in every single classroom, because it is impossible to be able to teach 33 children and even 20 children, when you have children that have so many different needs. You have children coming in on a 5th grade reading level in 9th grade, a 3rd grade reading level in 9th grade. We have children that are unable to write going into high school. This is unacceptable. And this isn't something that just started. We're not talking about a learning loss because of COVID. We're talking about a learning pandemic as a result of not fairly funding Philadelphia schools. We are the largest school district, or one of the largest school districts in the state of Pennsylvania, and we do not get the money that we deserve. And that is why coming up in a couple of months, there's going to be a court case that addresses the fair funding formula and how many big cities like here in Pittsburgh as well are being shorted money. So I think we need to lower class sizes. I think we need to spend on mental health. I think we need to get our buildings up to par. And I think that this public needs to be comfortable about paying for it. Why is it that we can find money for war and we can find money to bail out businesses and corporations, but when it comes to the future of our children, we can never find the money? That's absolutely ridiculous. This is our future. We're talking about future doctors, future lawyers, future teachers. And many of these children are being left behind. And so when we talk about the gun violence situation that we have in our city, what we're talking about is the consistent and deliberate underfunding of Philadelphia schools, which means that it puts kids at a higher risk of becoming dropouts. And kids who become dropouts turn to a life of crime. And that is just facts. That is the reality. So, you know, I'm glad that parents and teachers and other folks are speaking up about this issue. I do have to ask, where were you 5 years ago? But thank you. Welcome aboard. And let's roll up our sleeves and get to work, because it's not just COVID that is causing this issue. This is something that was an issue when I was in high school.
Just because you brought up the gun violence crisis, I'm wondering if you can speak to how this year has gone with students that you had in class and how you navigated that difficult situation virtually.
I mean, not only are we dealing with gun violence, but also we were smack dab in the middle of a uprising that occurred after the murders of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. So you had students that would, I'm going to be honest with you, Kevin, and say that there were moments when I didn't teach. There were moments when we all sat on Zoom and cried together. I had a student that knew Walter Wallace Jr., who was shot and killed in West Philadelphia in the middle of a mental health crisis. And they found out from us. Their family didn't tell them because they wanted to wait until after school. And they found out in my classroom. And so what we're talking about is trauma. We're talking about a population here in Philadelphia that are absolutely traumatized. We have a mental health crisis here in Philadelphia, and that is what is leading to a large number of the murders and the violence that we're seeing in the city. Because and I say this as a mother who had to deal with a child who had a mental health crisis during COVID. I'm a teacher and I have good insurance, and my husband works for Drexel and he has good insurance. And guess what? There was a moment that we had to plead to our insurance company to pay for our child to stay in the hospital that they were staying in so that they could get the treatment that they needed. And if that happened to me as a middle class person with two excellent insurances, what is happening to parents who do not have those resources? So yes, I am that teacher where I listen to my students. And if my students need to cry, if my students need to talk, then we are going to stop. We are not going to talk about African American history. We're going to talk about feelings. We're going to talk about emotions. And we're going to talk about how can I, as a teacher, empower you to use your voice. And I was very proud of the Philly Black Students Alliance that arose in the summertime of last year. And it's a group of Black students from Central, Masterman, Northeast High School, and a few others. And they spoke at the school district. So I would also tell teachers, you have to empower your students, right? Like you have to first listen to them, know their story, and then tell them the avenues that they can use to make people listen. Because we as adults are always talking about what needs to change, but we keep failing our kids. So maybe it's time to allow our students to have a voice, listen to them, and actually implement what they're asking us to implement. And maybe that is when things will change and we'll see violence drop and we'll see gun violence drop and we'll see more students invested in their city and in their schools and in their futures.
Matthew Fisher, we're talking about some of the underlying issues in Philadelphia and how maybe the school district can address them when things go back to 5 days a week in school, which is the tentative plan in Philadelphia in the fall. Mental health, though, clearly is not an issue that stops at the city of Philadelphia's border. And you're dealing with that in Bucks County as well. And I'm curious what you think about how you're preparing for the fall and what that's going to mean for your school.
So Miss Ridgway's numbers are pretty accurate when she gave her ratios for student to counselor ratios nationally at the state level, what the recommendations are. We were fortunate even prior to the pandemic, just from observing our students and gathering their feedback and listening to them, we thought it was important to invest in school counseling. So we were, and as a private school, we rely on raising money and our alumni to, donate money just to keep the doors open. And we were fortunate to have one of our alumni invest in school counseling because, it was something we believe so strongly. And so through that, person's generosity, our student to counselor ratio this year was 115-1.
Wow.
So we feel like, and you know what, you can never be on top of everything, right? So in a school like Northeast High School, 3,500 kids, I mean, that's almost an impossible task for those teachers and for those counselors. In our school with 460 students this year and 4 full-time counselors, it's still, I mean, we're lucky, but it's still almost an impossible task. We don't know what to expect in the fall. And we're preparing for that. So that's an ongoing conversation that, the Archdiocese is having at that level with the principals and the school leaders in trying to prepare for what the fall is going to look like. You're going to be back in school 5 days a week. Is there going to be a period, a transitional period for the students, even though they may have been in school 2 or 3 days a week, now they're in school 5 days a week, or the students that were virtual for the entire year coming back to school 5 days a week, or what the students may have experienced being at home, for 2 to 3 to 5 days a week. I think it's something that we're going to have to keep an eye on in Bucks County, in the city of Philadelphia, out in Chester County, everywhere. It's, as you said in your question, mental health doesn't stop anywhere. I think we're in a fortunate position with the investments that we've made in school counseling, but it's still something that we're going to have to keep an eye on heading into the next school year for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I do want to acknowledge that Charity Robbins had to leave. Unfortunately, she had another school event that she told us about ahead of time. Would have wished to get her thoughts on one more time in this conversation, but there'll have to be another event. Charity could be the star of it, as we've learned today. Avi, wanted to bring you into the conversation. Again, when we're talking about how school districts essentially across the state and the region are going to use these stimulus funds, what do you see kind of momentum building behind? What are you going to be most watching kind of on this issue come fall?
Well, certainly a lot of the money's not spoken for at this point, but the first thing that a lot of school districts and charter schools have done is invest in some sort of either tutoring or summer recovery programs. In part, I think just because it's the most immediate, obvious thing to do right now. I think there are a couple of areas to watch. One is how much of the money is invested in things that we would frame as like academic recovery. So typically that's math and reading, sometimes science and social studies, but sort of trying to fill in academic skills gaps that might have developed over the last 18 months. How much of it will be invested in a lot of the stuff we're talking about here, which is, mental health, social readjustment, and the always tricky thing with that is it's often difficult to measure how well those things are working, and typically administrators will gravitate towards things that you can sort of measure and prove, right? That there is some sort of effect. And it's the old saw that you treasure what you measure. And obviously test scores are the most obvious form of measurement. Test scores are typically focused around math and reading. So, there will certainly be pressure to do skills recovery in those areas. And I guess the question is how much of the money is invested in that versus things that, we all acknowledge are important, but are difficult to sort of definitively measure. And then I think the third category of thing is something that Keziah brought up, which is how much of it should be invested in things that are really not directly, that it sort of existed well before the pandemic, like capital expenses, infrastructure woes, like fixing these things that built up over many, many years. The federal government could have said, look, we want you to spend all this money on, academic or social needs directly related to the pandemic, but they didn't. They said you could spend a good amount of it if you want on improving your buildings, your pipes, your HVAC, all that stuff, building new schools. So that's an option. And it'll be interesting to see how many school districts sort of decide that that's how they want to spend the money. And it'll be an evolving conversation over the next couple of years.
I want to do a viewer question here. Matt Schumann wrote in, based on the positive lessons learned during the pandemic and online learning, how can school, when returned to full in-person, best fit the modern student? What needs to change? So I like that. I want to put that to you, Maritza. Like, certainly there were positives through this thing. Maybe we learned something new about education. From your point of view, what were the positive things, and what do you want to stick?
The positive things, in my opinion, as a school employee and also as a parent, is that I saw that our children now are more technologically advanced as a result of being forced to learn how to use a laptop. A lot of us, I guess I'm 50, so my exposure to technology, I go back as far back as, learning how to type on a typewriter. So, but everyone, heads of household had to learn how to use technology to be able to help their children. As I said earlier, children in pre-K are learning how to, get on a laptop. That's a positive. This is a learned skill that they can then take throughout their school career. Things that worked definitely need to be kept in place. Those teachers that also now acquired a new skill and being able to teach in person and virtually. Not every teacher has been successful, even after all this time, and learning to do that and being able to also engage children in different platforms, not just in person. The things that work, please continue it. Taking advantage of technology and not revert back to the old books, as Charity said. If they're, making sure that all the schools have advanced technology, and not have to go back to the old library where the books have been there since 1972. We don't want to go back to that. We want to be able to move forward in that process. The fact that, one thing that hasn't really been talked about, school nurses. The nurses across districts have done amazing work in making sure that the children got tested in a timely manner. Even if it was done randomly, it was like very quickly. The private organization that was used to work for the district and going into our school buildings and testing the adults in the building, they did tremendous work as well. So things that help to keep us safe need to be kept going. Whatever methods of sanitation and disinfecting that's used, keep that going. And I'm still curious, we may need to keep one day in which hybrid learning exists, because how are we going to keep our schools clean? If we go back to 5 days a week, how are we going to make sure that the school gets thoroughly cleaned? If we go back to 5 days a week, when is it going to happen? That again will then require that the custodial staff get paid overtime, or they add more custodial staff into the school budget to provide a second shift of people that can then come in every day after 4 p.m. until midnight. That's another shift to thoroughly clean these school buildings. You know, they have to think about they have to think about that, because they're not going to say, okay, we're going to tear down this school because it's so dirty, the pipes are so old, there's still asbestos, there's still lead. Tear the school down, but you got to make sure you take care of everyone that's in that school now, the existing population of that school, if that is what's determined. If a new school is built, make sure that not just the affluent children attend that school. If you build a school in my neighborhood kids have to be able to attend that school too, and not on a lottery base. Allow for the choice, and also keep the option for those families that are immunocompromised to continue to be able to learn virtually. Do not take that choice away from families. Give them that option so they can be rest assured that my children are still safe. I would hate for families to then call schools and say, I'm sorry, we had a loss in our family because my daughter or my son had to go to school. They got the virus and brought it home because they were forced to go to school. And as far as our missing children, and who I call our missing children, are our children that we lost this school year that have not locked down one time. We have to find those babies. We have to find all those students. And if you want to know how to help our kids for next year, for the schools that have instituted an ILP, an individualized learning plan for their student, the teachers that have taken the time to write that out so that the following grade, that teacher understands that student a little better, I salute you. I applaud you. If you haven't done it yet in your school, I'm sorry, shame on you. Because you're not preparing that teacher to help educate that child that's coming into your grade that suffered a lot of learning loss.
Keziah, curious from a teaching point of view, even if things get back to quote unquote normal, where you're in the classroom 5 days a week, what will the lessons from this past year be that just stick with you and, be a part of who you are as a teacher?
Well, first and foremost, that we probably should have been one-to-one for technology a long time ago. Students should have had access to a laptop that they could have taken home and been able to do their work. I think about, how many students went home, especially when we switched to Google Classrooms a few years ago and started using more online platforms. A lot of teachers put their homework online. How many students went home and didn't have access to a laptop and had to do their homework on their computer? So I believe the district is moving to a one-to-one, and something we should have done a long time ago, but we have the opportunity to do that now. I think as a teacher, I already didn't really like textbooks to begin with, just because I'm lucky that our new principal who came in a few years ago bought us textbooks, but a lot of the textbooks are old. And so I think being able to just post whole books online for kids to be able to read on through Google Drive, and being able to figure out how to create gallery walks and do projects fully online, I think is a really important takeaway. I hope that we're also thinking about the fact that the kids that didn't log on are also the kids that never showed up when we were in person to begin with. There were so many children before COVID happened on the roster that would have, absences in the hundreds, cuts in the hundreds, right? And so when you have 33 kids in a classroom, or 32 or 31, you have to make decisions every single day. Do I grade this, or do I call home, or do I lesson plan? What am I going to get done today in order to move the needle forward for my kids? And so I think, hopefully the powers that be, the public also, just realize how much work it is for teachers. What I'm taking away is that if you're a teacher and you survived this past year, you are an angel. You're an angel, because the work that needed to be done, the level of emotional checking we had to do for ourselves, where we had to so many students talked about not being able to get out of bed, like they were depressed. It was hard for them to just roll over and turn on their camera. There were teachers that felt the same way. And somehow every single day they felt the strength, and admin as well, they felt the strength and the willpower to get up and turn those cameras on, and sometimes teach to blank screens. So I am so appreciative of being able to be back in the classroom. I think the school district announced we're going to be back in the classroom. I'm so excited to be back in the classroom with my students. And as a teacher, what I'm taking away is that our kids are resilient. And if we give them what they need, they're going to blossom. And they're going to blossom in the most beautiful way, and then come back and give back to their school and to their community in ways that is going to enrich all of us and help to address some of the ills that we're seeing every single day.
One more for you. I get this comment in the chat. Maxwell Catoodle kind of talks about successes of virtual school for maybe shyer students. Was that something that, man, sorry, was that something that you saw? Like, what were there students who that worked for more because they kind of didn't thrive in the social aspect of school?
Yeah, obviously the only kids that I still had this year was my I'm using slang, but my IB anthropology students. That's a 2-year course. So I had them last year, and then I also had, got to have them this year. And so they were all outgoing. We had a community already. But I would say, like, some of the kids who I would think would be very shy and unwilling to participate definitely were in the chat. Like, they were in the chat, they were thriving, they were participating. And again, I have to check my privilege. 2 of my classes were magnet classes. The other 2 classes were in an SLC called Health and Medical. And I know that some other teachers did not have that same level of engagement with their students. But I can honestly say that I had my shy students, I had my outgoing students, they were all participating because we built a community. And I think that was super important for me as an educator to build a community. So to answer that question, I think there were a lot of kids. I know for a fact there were a lot of kids who said, I actually prefer virtual learning to being in person. But on the flip side, there were a ton of kids who said, you know what, before COVID, I really didn't want to go to school. I went to school because I wanted to get good grades and I want to be successful, but I hated it. I now have a whole new appreciation and love for school. And they're like, they can't wait to get back in the fall. So there is, I think, also students and parents, and I'm a parent, so I definitely felt this way. We, as a parent and as students, there's just a whole new appreciation for having your child being able to go into a building every single day and learn. And I think that is like the biggest thing.
And I guess same question to you, Matthew Fisher, when you're thinking about the positive lessons, the things that you will take away from this COVID era of schooling forward beyond, what are the key things that you're thinking?
I guess, our teachers were forced into a situation to teach a style that they had never taught before. So naturally, there were different strategies, there were different things that they tried in the classroom. And I'm sure they realized that some of them are like, wow, I could have done this. COVID didn't need to force me into trying it this way, but it did. And I think it's probably something I'm going to do moving forward. And for us, we rely on marketing our school to try to attract students to want to come here. So we had to do things to expose our school and our school community to folks without, having students in the building every day, shadowing one of our students just to get a feel for what our school's like. So we had to be creative in our marketing and the way that we tried to recruit students. And I think that some of the things that we did this year may have been better than things we were doing when we had the freedom to do whatever we want. So I think that there are definitely some blessings from being forced into this situation. That being said, I know for a fact that our teachers and our students are looking forward to not teaching on a hybrid schedule and not teaching virtually and not learning virtually. I'm sure after a couple months next year, the students are going to be like, it was kind of nice being home twice a week. But right now, I mean, across the board, we had each grade level in to finish out the year, individually, the 11th grade on Monday, then the 10th and 9th graders separately. And they're excited for September, which usually in the beginning of June, they're excited for the end of June, right? Because they're out of school. So they're excited to get back together. And I think the thing that they miss the most is the social aspect. Based on the data that we have so far, we don't think there's been tremendous learning loss, based on the learning model that we had this year, but there was definitely some impacts on them socially, emotionally, that I think will hopefully naturally recover themselves heading into next school year. And, they'll be able to see each other this summer, and hopefully, fingers crossed, things go back to as normal as they were before. But they're excited for September, believe it or not.
Yeah. Yeah. We're coming up on the end of our event, but I'm just curious for, I guess, one more question. Maritza, this Zoom era that we've all gone through, we see into each other's lives in just a different way, right? Like the role between boss and employee changed, the role between teacher and student changed. Things became more intimate. I'm just curious if you can pinpoint something from this past year that made you see the system differently, or made you appreciate something different about how the education system works, and how that kind of resonated in your kid's life too.
Well, having a view into someone's personal space, I hope that for those educators and administrative folks that had those hard conversations about whatever frustrations they felt about having to teach to a blank screen. The only thing that ever crossed my mind, because of my background, is that you do not know each family's home situation. So it may not have been that the child was being disrespectful by not showing their screen, but they may have not been in a space. They may have not been afforded a corner or a wall or a room where it was quiet enough, or that it was clean, or that, there was even light or enough electricity to afford, to be able to be seen visually. So I'm hoping that they continued throughout this experience, just offer everyone grace with that regard. Even for teachers, we don't know every single teacher's home situation. So they may have been times where they did not want to be seen online also. But it was just part of their role. They had to be seen, so they did the best that they could. I had to actually jump in on a class because they couldn't find a substitute. So I had to sit in on a second grade class and keep some second graders busy for about 3 or 4 hours. And I was like, my goodness, the thought of me having to do that for an entire day was like, my hat's off to you. So I don't want to take up too much time. Just remember all the obstacles, and then now view them as opportunities to be able to affect change and to make things better for everyone, the students and the teachers and everyone, all the adults in the building for this coming school year.
Because I'm guessing you grew in empathy for your students through this year.
I mean, I've always been the empathetic one, like I've always had empathy for my students. And so that's why, I probably was one of the rebels where I wasn't really forcing kids to like put their cameras on, sorry.
That wasn't like, but that wasn't frustrating to you some days to just see that blank screen?
It was so frustrating. It did take a toll on my mental health. on more than one occasion, because I'm like, are they getting it? Do they hear me? Do they understand? But every second I would have those thoughts, somebody will comment in the chat or somebody will unmute, and I'm like, okay, they get it, they hear me, they understand. And so yeah, it was hard, but I also had to have grace. My principal has been absolutely amazing. Our administration has been absolutely amazing. And when I wrote this word down, when you asked Maritza this question, and compassion, compassion. If anything, I hope that folks have learned compassion from this, because I know that there were some teachers that had a really hard time at their school because certain administrators did not show compassion. And I am really blessed and lucky to work at the school that I work, where where our entire administration showed compassion. I had several situations where I suffered a loss, and I learned about that loss in the middle of teaching. I had several situations where one of my children had a crisis that I had to deal with, and I could have lost them as well. And I don't think I would be teaching if I did not have an administrator, my principal, Mr. Omar Crowder, who showed compassion, and our assistant principals like Ms. Mecca and Mr. Greaves, who showed compassion. So I think that's the biggest thing that we should be doing going into this new year, is having grace and having compassion for our parents, for our teachers, our administrators, and our students.
I think I'm going to have to let that be the final word for this conversation. I think it's a good spot to end. So thank you so much to all of our panelists today, Keziah Ridgway, Maritza Gurity, Matthew Fisher, and earlier we had Charity Robbins. You guys were great panelists. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much. And you've been listening and watching Schooled Live, Education Lost and Found in the COVID Era. I am Kevin McCory, and we were also joined this hour by WHYY education reporter Avi Wolfman-Arent. Thanks for being here, Avi. And thank you to everybody who is out there in the virtual world. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as we all did. Thank you.